Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the latest release of the Epstein files containing 1,056 documents naming Putin and 9,629 references to Moscow. And we'll look into how much Epstein's compromat factory supplied Putin and speak with Craig Unger, the author of several books, including the New York Times bestsellers House of Bush, House of Saud, and House of Trump, House of Putin. He's written about the Trump-Russia scandal for The New Republic, Vanity Fair, and The Washington Post, and his latest books are American Compromat, How the KGB Cultivated Donald Trump and Related Tales of Sex, Greed, Power, and Treachery, and Den of Spies, The Untold Story of Reagan, Carter, and the Treason that Stole the White House. Then we'll speak with Ari Berman, the national voting rights correspondent for Mother Jones and a reporting fellow at the Type Media Center. He's the author of Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. And his latest book is Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It. We'll discuss his article at Mother Jones, From Minnesota to Georgia, Trump's plans to interfere in the midterms are becoming more dangerous. Then finally, with Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, already demonized by Vice President Vance and about to lose their temporary protected status, having been targeted for what Trump calls a large deportation, we'll speak with Robert Alexander, a professor of political science at Bowling Green State University and the former founding director of the Institute for Civics and Public Policy at Ohio Northern University. He's the author of 4 books, including Presidential Electors and the Electoral College, and most recently, Representation and the Electoral College. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now is Craig Unger, the author of several books, including the New York Times bestsellers House of Bush, House of Saud, and Den of Spies, The Untold Story of Reagan, Carter, and the Treason that Stole the White House. Welcome to Background Briefing, Craig Unger.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Craig. And there's a pretty extraordinary story coming out of the British press, the Daily Mail, and I wanted to talk to you about it. And they've looked at the files, obviously, that were just released a couple of days ago. The latest tranche is still apparently, 2.7 million came out, and Todd Blanche says that's all of it. But apparently there's at least 3 million more documents and films and videos that have been held back. But in the files that were released in the last couple of days, they include 1,056 documents naming Russian President Vladimir Putin and 9,629 referring to Moscow in the Epstein files. So what do you think it revealed? Is there anything that buttresses kind of reporting you've been doing now for decades?
Well, yeah, I mean, what you see is corruption of a magnitude that is absolutely extraordinary. And I still have a number of unanswered questions. But you see, among other things, that Jeffrey Epstein has put together what is probably the greatest compromat factory in history that I can think of. That is, compromat means is a portmanteau of compromising that material. And the Russians were terrific about it. I mean, anyone who's gone to Moscow, and I haven't, but when you go to your hotel room, be careful because there are almost certainly video cameras in the room or sound recorders or whatever. And if you do anything untoward, it is probably being recorded. And Epstein did that at a level that I can't think of anyone in history who's done it. And of course, he had homes in his island home in the Virgin Islands. He had a huge home in outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, the biggest townhouse in New York City, a big home in Paris. And there were as many as 1,000 girls, it's been reported, who he had recruited one way or another to perform, induce people into doing things that you really don't want to get out there.
Well, apparently he also had a supply of Russian girls as well. But one of the emails, which is interesting, and it goes into the history, and many have suggested from the intel people that I've talked to that Jeffrey Epstein was sort of handed over the Robert Maxwell account, and Maxwell himself, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, had unquestionable ties both to the KGB and to Mossad. But one of the emails, it's from Jeffrey Epstein from March the 15th of 2018. It's redacted who the email was sent to, but the subject was "he passed away," and it's about the death of Robert Maxwell. And it says, Robert Maxwell threatened Mossad. He told them unless they gave him £400 million to save his crumbling empire, he would expose all he had done for them. In that time, he had free access to Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street, to Ronald Reagan's White House, to the Kremlin, and to the corridors of power throughout Europe. Maxwell passed on all of the secrets he learned to Mossad in Tel Aviv. In turn, they tolerated his excesses, vanities, and insatiable appetite for a luxurious lifestyle and women. He told his controllers who they should target and how they should do it. He appointed himself as Israel's unofficial ambassador to the Soviet bloc. So what do you make of that, Craig?
Well, I wrote about Maxwell at considerable length in American Compromise. And he's a fascinating figure. And I think there's been a lot of reporting done on this. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, but it is absolutely clear he had enormous access to the intelligence services of MI6 in Russia, or the Soviet Union, rather. He had great access to the KGB and was close to the rulers in the Kremlin. And he also did with Israel. So, I interviewed a former Israeli agent, Ari Ben Menashe, who was working for Maxwell just before Maxwell died, and he was working in Maxwell's London office. And he told me he saw Jeffrey Epstein there. This obviously was before Maxwell died. And I see a lot of parallels between Robert Maxwell, who, of course, is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who for a while at least was Epstein's girlfriend, and for many years she was his, I guess you'd call her a personal assistant, or she ran his operation in many ways. So the big question to me is Epstein another Robert Maxwell? And Robert Maxwell, I believe, in the end was working for himself. He had ties to the intelligence services of all these countries, but in the end, he was out for himself and was a high-level asset more than an agent who was directly working for the KGB.
But that sounds like a description of Donald Trump.
It does. I mean, as I've said before, there's a big difference between being an agent and an asset. An agent is really an employee of an intelligence agency. He or she gets a paycheck. They're employees. They can be tasked with very specific operations. An asset is more of a trusted contact, a friend. There are many different kinds of assets. And Robert Maxwell, and I believe I've reported, yes, Donald Trump is an intelligence asset for Russia right now. And we see it coming out. And I've written two books on this, and it goes back more than 40 years to 1980 when an operative from the KGB helped Donald Trump put together his first big successful real estate development, the Grand Hyatt Hotel near Grand Central Station. And Trump wanted to furnish it with, of course, every hotel needs hundreds and hundreds of television sets. And you would think an operation like the Hyatt would go to a big vendor like Samsung or Sony, but instead they went to a little outfit called Joy Ludd Electronics, which turns out to have been a KGB front. And that was how the KGB got their tentacles into Donald Trump.
Well, is it then the case, Craig Unger, that through Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein inherited the Robert Maxwell account and his contacts with both the KGB and Mossad?
Well, I think it's quite possible. I mean, so I have someone who saw him there with Robert Maxwell, but I don't know how it first began, really. That is, was he really working diligently for Robert Maxwell's empire? Then was he seeing Ghislaine Maxwell at the time? The first time that I could find out where he was seen in public with Ghislaine was after her father died. There was a memorial service of some type in New York City, and Ghislaine on her arm, she had Jeffrey Epstein. And that's the first time that I could see him. There could have been earlier times, but I've not been able to find any. And it's clear that Epstein had close ties to Russian intelligence after the Soviet Union folded and the KGB was replaced by the FSB. I found two Russian women working for him, and these were not the sex slaves. These were one, Masha Drakova, worked for him as a publicist, and another, Svetlana Pozadayeva, worked for for Epstein rather, sort of as a hostess of some type. And what interested me here was that Vladimir Putin has said many times that he believes artificial intelligence will rule the future, and whoever rules artificial intelligence will basically run the world. And here you have two women who became very prominent in Silicon Valley, especially Masha Drakova, who has a venture fund that's very significant and has backed some of the top people in artificial intelligence. And this was her entree to that sector. When she was in Russia as a teenager, she was head of Nashi, which was a youth organization that was sort of the Putin youth movement. It's been compared with Hitler Youth, and she was the national head of it. And then she finally escaped to the West and ended up with Jeffrey Epstein, and now she's sort of a big shot in Silicon Valley.
Right. She has a company called Day One Ventures, and FBI say that her job basically in Silicon Valley is to steal technology for Russia.
Right. Well, that is the question. I mean, right now I don't have enough information to say that she's a spy, but she certainly seems to pose real national security risks that I believe. I mean, I think Putin sadly was right. Whoever runs artificial intelligence it's like taking over the entire media world. All of factual reality in a few years will be contained. It may be in a biased form. It may be edited sharply to serve the aims of whomever has controlled it. But it's very scary if you've been using AI for research. I mean, you can get certain answers depending upon, and I suspect they're going to be changing depending upon who's controlling which operating system you're using.
So in this trench of Epstein files that just came out, there's a number of mentions to Epstein having meetings with Vladimir Putin. There's one from September the 11th of 2011 where he gets an email from somebody, redacted, discussing an appointment with Putin during the forthcoming trip to Russia. And this individual tells Epstein, spoke with Igor. He said last time that you were in Palm Beach, you told him you had an appointment with Putin on September the 16th and that he could go ahead and book his ticket to Russia and arrive a few days before then. And then later in 2014, in an email to Epstein, his Japanese entrepreneur friend, Joy Ito, tells Epstein that another U.S. billionaire named Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, was unable to join. Hey, Jeffrey, Ito writes, I wasn't able to convince Reid to change his schedule to go meet with you. And that email was sent just after the Russians shot down the Malaysian passenger jet over Ukraine on July the 17th of 2014, killing all 298 people. So obviously it wasn't, the optics weren't good, at least for Reid Hoffman. So what do we know about how many times he met with Putin? Because if you're running a compromat factory, if you meet with Putin, he's the number one consumer of Epstein's compromat.
Oh, absolutely. And the Putin stages every year. It's called an event that is the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and it is sort of Russia's answer to Davos. And it's also so people from all over the world come there. And if I'm not mistaken, Epstein has a presence there, and it's also known as sort of the Super Bowl of honey traps. I mean, imagine here you're having multi-billionaires from all over the world coming into Russia. So this is a great opportunity for them to collect enormous amounts of intelligence. There are a lot of unanswered questions in this material. As you know, 3 million pages were dumped, and it's really hard to read 3 million pages in 2 days. But I think a lot of this material has to be explored in greater and greater depth. One of the most astounding things, if you think about it, was the FBI and the CIA said they found nothing to follow up on in this. I mean, and it's just a mind-boggling once you start to go through it. I mean, you go through it understanding that everything needs to be corroborated, but it's hard to believe all of this is false information.
Well, but Craig, surely you don't expect anything on the FBI headed by Keystone Cash Patel.
Not now. No, you're absolutely right. But I mean, this has been going on for 20 years. So it's I wonder if they edited it, but which certainly wouldn't surprise me. But you do have materials in there that were there during the Obama era and so forth.
Well, the new head of FBI counterintelligence was born in the Soviet Union, so go figure.
No, I mean, when you look at this information, you start to believe, wow, the United States is not what I thought it was. It's just an entirely different country.
Well, there's a group of people that aren't loyal to anybody except money, right? And Trump is among them, Epstein's among them, Maxwell's among them. Then you've got these Silicon Valley oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. They have no loyalty to this country, it would seem. So isn't that what we should be concerned about? This
absolutely.
Group of malign oligarchs getting together to create a kind of an international criminal enterprise?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, even after Trump is gone, and I have to wonder when that will be, but I worry about the so-called broligarchs. I mean, who is going to control artificial intelligence? And in that regard, I think if you look at the First Amendment, it's just woefully antiquated and obsolete. It talks about freedom of the press, but the media, it doesn't even have broadcast media. It doesn't even have radio, TV, much less cable, social media, the internet, and now AI, all of which, I think should have some degree of regulation.
So, back to Epstein, what do you think is going to be required to get the rest of this stuff, particularly the videotapes, particularly the tapes of Trump and the photos of Trump with these young women, and some of the most disgusting stuff I've ever heard has been attributed to what Trump has done from affidavits of people that have been involved. There's also the 15-year-old young woman who said she was raped by Trump, and then she sort of disappeared after she filed suit against him. Do you think any of the stuff that they're holding back is going to be? Do you think that for example, Massey and Ro Khanna have some juice? Can they put some pressure on?
Well, that's the big question. We need a Congress that has some balls, and it's interesting when since Marjorie Taylor Greene defected from the Trump camp. We need more of that, and I have no idea whether we'll get it or not. Obviously, this leads us into the midterms in November, and I think if they were held now, the Democrats would win overwhelmingly in the House, and they might well take the Senate as well. In which case, we could expect, I would hope, to see some real action and impeachments of various cabinet members, Trump himself. But as the midterms approach, I would be stunned if Trump allows free and fair elections to take place without any interference whatsoever.
Well, Craig, I thank you very much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Craig Unger, who's the author of several books, including the New York Times bestsellers House of Bush, House of Saud, and House of Trump, House of Putin. He's written about the Trump-Russia scandal for the New Republic, Vanity Fair, and the Washington Post, and his latest books are American Compromat, How the KGB Cultivated Donald Trump, and Related Tales of Sex, Greed, Power, and Treachery, and Den of Spies, The Untold Story of Reagan, Carter, and the Treason that Stole the White House. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how, from Minnesota to Georgia, Trump's plans to interfere in the midterms are becoming more dangerous. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Ari Berman, the National Voting Rights Correspondent for Mother Jones and a reporting fellow at Type Media Center. He's the author of Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. And his latest book is Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It. And he has an article at Mother Jones, From Minnesota to Georgia, Trump's plans to interfere in the midterms are becoming more dangerous. Welcome to Background Briefing, Ari Berman.
Hey, Ian, good to talk to you again. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. And it's reporting out from the New York Times today that says that Tulsi Gabbard essentially was sent down to Fulton County, Georgia by Trump on a political errand. And she arrived there after the FBI had conducted the raid and seized truckloads of the 2020 ballots that Trump obviously asked for. It also reveals that she called Trump and he didn't pick up the call, but then he called back shortly. And she put him on speakerphone to the group of FBI people who had conducted the raid, and Trump gave them a brief pep talk and thanked them for their work. So the feeling I get, Ari, is that she's so out of her depth that as a DNI that she's been somewhat sidelined because of her incompetence, let alone her ties to Moscow. But is she trying to get back into Trump's graces by doing these political errands, which he's so obsessed with 2020 that that's his priority, right? He doesn't care about the rest of the world. You know, his obsessions are 2020 elections that he thinks he's won, has convinced himself he's won, and getting a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, there's so many things that are incredibly odd about this entire thing. First off, the fact that they got the ballots themselves. I mean, they've been talking about this kind of thing for 5 years, but to actually get control of the ballots is really unprecedented. And there's so many questions we have as to who's overseeing the ballots, why do they want them, why is there a criminal investigation into what occurred in 2020 after that election had been audited 3 times by the state of Georgia. What was Tulsi Gabbard doing there? She's prohibited by law from taking place in domestic law enforcement operations. Of course, Trump's phone call is just the latest wrinkle to all of this, another unprecedented thing to add to the unprecedented things that have already happened. So there's really just a lot of questions about what happened in Georgia. I don't think there's going to be any good answers because this is just an extreme weaponization of Trump's lies, of law enforcement. And I think it really goes to show how far they're willing to go to try to interfere in the midterms, that this is not the beginning. This is something that is going to metastasize into something greater.
So you have the DNI basically doing these political errands about 2020, which is Trump's obsession. You also have the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, doing his errands as well. And she revealed her chicanery in a sort of shakedown effort in Minnesota, where she basically told the Attorney General of Minnesota, we'll back off on ICE and stop terrorizing your cities if you hand over the voting rolls. Yep. I mean, this is mafia stuff. But it also, I think, indicates the priorities of the Trump administration. His top people that he's appointed, the DNI, the Attorney General, and the head of the FBI, they're all working on this election chasing ghosts, right?
I mean, the thing is they're obsessed with it for 2 reasons. They're obsessed with it, number one, because Trump is obsessed with it, and he's obsessed with trying to somehow prove that he didn't lose in 2020. I think that's the less serious part of it. The more serious part of it is that they're obsessed with losing the next election. They're obsessed with losing the midterms, and they're going to do everything they can to try not to lose. And they know they're not going to win in what would end up being a fair election because they've lost so many elections already in 2025 and heading into 2026, most notably recently over the weekend in Texas. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to take control of state and local voting processes, whether it's take control of the voting rolls, take control of who runs elections, take control of election administration, so that they're in a position to contest the elections if they lose. I think that's ultimately the broader plan here. Trump's obsession about 2020 feeds into this, but I think they're looking forward as much as they're looking backwards.
So does that mean then, Ari, that seizing the ballots is what they want to do in the next election? It's not so much that they're going to rig the election before the election, but after the election, they're going to rig the vote by seizing the ballots. Is that the plan?
It's very possible. I mean, I think first off, in Georgia, there's a provision in the law where they could actually take over election administration in Fulton County. The State Board of Election, which is run by 3 MAGA Republicans, could potentially take over elections in that county, which is the bluest and largest county in the state. And so it's a very, very important county. If Republicans were to get control of the running of elections in Fulton County, it would have ripple effects across Georgia. And of course, Georgia's a place where there's likely to be both a competitive Senate race and a competitive governor's race this fall. And then they could try to do that in other places where they could try to control the election process. They could try to say there was some kind of irregularities and we need to challenge the vote. And quite frankly, the most disturbing thing to me about what happened in Georgia is, why did a court sign off on this? Why did the court sign off on a criminal investigation when everyone knows there was no fraud in the election, when the election was audited 3 times, when everyone who's looked at this said Trump lost. Why would a judge sign off on a warrant that alleged criminal wrongdoing in Fulton County? So that to me is the most disturbing part about this. It's not that Trump attempted to do it, it's that he was actually successful in pulling it off.
Well, but targeting Fulton County is essentially targeting the black vote, right? That's where the concentration of the black vote is in that state, which is, as you say, it's the bluest part of the state of Georgia. So there's no secret about him suppressing the black vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been an underreported part of this is that Fulton County is a majority non-white county. It's the largest county in the state. It's not the only heavily black and heavily minority county in Georgia, but it's certainly one of, if not the most influential one. And so if you take control of election administration, you can then do things like cut early voting, limit the number of polling places, purge people from the voter rolls, selectively decide how you're going to throw out ballots if the election is challenged. All of those things that happen in election administration, they're trying to get control of these kind of things. And they've already succeeded in some level on getting control of these things in terms of getting different secretaries of state or attorney generals or governors that are sympathetic to Trump, but they're still meeting resistance. And so they're trying to use the power of the federal government to take over election administration at the state and local level. I think that is the ultimate end game here. And while Trump's lies about the last election may be motivating a lot of this, it doesn't stop at 2020. They are looking forward as well as backwards.
Well, they've already basically operated on Trump's obsessions and whims, because some time back he had a screening at Mar-a-Lago of this 2,000 Mules, this ridiculous made-up piece of nonsense by Dinesh D'Souza that had the theory that 2,000 black men in Georgia, paid for by George Soros, basically shoved into the voting boxes thousands and thousands of fake ballots. That was the premise of this stupid film that had absolutely no basis in fact. It obviously galvanized Trump's attention. And what did the state of Georgia do? They got rid of all of these mail-in drop boxes, all but a handful, right? So you can see it doesn't take much, the most lunatic conspiracy theory, and Trump is able to get the Georgia authorities to act on it.
No, I mean, and that's a good point because the laws have already changed in a lot of states in response to Trump's lies about the election. And Georgia was one of the main places that changed their laws. It used to be very easy to vote by mail, for example. Now it's much harder. It's harder to get a ballot. It's harder to return the ballot. There's more rules. There's fewer places to drop it off. Mail votes are being disqualified at a higher level now. They would like to go much further in terms of the changes they would do. You already hear Republicans saying things like, we need proof of citizenship to register to vote. We shouldn't have early voting. We shouldn't have mail voting. We should only have voting in person on election day and then make it as restrictive as possible. So, I mean, they clearly want to change the voting process in a lot of different ways. And Trump's lies are what is motivating that. And those are magnified by the fear of losing power, right? Because it's very clear that if the election were held today, Republicans would not do well. And it would potentially even be a landslide based on some of the data we're seeing. And even some of the gerrymandering they've done hasn't been enough. They already may not have gerrymandered Texas well enough if the Hispanic vote shifts. So I think they're going into panic mode. And as they go into panic mode, their actions are going to become more extreme and radical and unmoored from any kind of democratic norms.
So, Ari Berman, let's talk more about your article at Mother Jones, From Minnesota to Georgia, Trump Plans to Interfere in the Midterms Are Becoming More Dangerous. You make the case that there's a clear connection between the deployment of ICE in Minnesota, and we just mentioned how Pam Bondi tried to shake down the state by saying, we'll back off the ICE terror if you hand over your voter rolls. But the same thing happened in Maine, and a lot of people were wondering why ICE suddenly showed up in Maine, where there's virtually no, certainly Hispanic citizens there, or non-citizens. So walk us through what happened in Maine, because there's a clear example of the deployment of ICE had more to do with the upcoming election than with the so-called immigration issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the full details of the ICE operation in Maine, but I did speak to the Maine Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, last week, and she said they were focused on harassing the Somali community in Maine, which is fairly sizable, not as big as Minnesota, but large for a state like Maine. And there was a special election underway in Lewiston, Maine, and they have a large Somali community. And so she was very concerned about that depressing turnout there. She was urging people to cast absentee ballots if they're afraid to go to the polls. But I think one of the things that people are concerned about is that ICE are going to go to polling stations and they're going to harass people at the polls, and that's very possible they could do that, even though it would likely be illegal. But I think the point is that they don't need to do that to have a suppressive effect. If ICE is in a place, or people are afraid of ICE more broadly, even if they aren't in a place, that could lead people to not show up. And the Maine Secretary of State basically said, if people are going to be too afraid to go to work or to go to school or to get groceries, then they're definitely going to be too afraid to vote. And this is going to affect, obviously, not just non-citizens, but people in, mixed status households. We've even seen, ICE and Border Patrol harass U.S. citizens. So just because you're a citizen doesn't make you immune, as we saw in the case of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And so I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned about what ICE was doing. The fact that in Minnesota, Pam Bondi tied getting the voting rolls to the ICE deployment made it seem like this is all about political leverage. They're just trying to harass, terrorize, occupy blue states, and either make people afraid to vote or use it as leverage to be able to exert other concessions that benefits the Trump administration's political agenda.
But how much do you think it's to do with this holding on to the Senate? Because clearly Senator Susan Collins is in trouble in Maine, and maybe the Republicans in the White House, Trump and company, have realized that she's probably not going to make it. So they've targeted John Ossoff in Georgia.
Yeah.
And did this ICE raid in Maine have anything to do with the fact that they think they're going to lose that Senate seat?
Well, it's interesting. It might have had that purpose, but it was so unpopular they actually supposedly left, or at least tamped down their presence, because it was hurting Susan Collins, because she said that she wanted ICE to leave because I think probably because it was hurting her politically. And so the interesting thing about what's happening in Minneapolis, what's happening in Maine, this could also potentially happening in Georgia, is this could have a backlash effect. That yes, this could intimidate people, this could suppress people, but it could also mobilize people, and it could also make people so angry that they're more likely to turn out and more likely to urge others to turn out and more likely to get politically engaged. So I don't think we know where the end goal is. I think everything that's happening is very disturbing, but I'm not sure it's going to work like the administration wants it to.
So just in closing, there are signs that Trump is trying. He recognizes he has a political problem. I don't know the extent to which he recognizes the backlash to the cruelty coming from both him and Miller. There's even some reporting that suggests that maybe Miller's being sidelined, that Susie Wiles is back in the picture. Do you have any last-minute thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think my overarching thought is that as the president becomes more unpopular, his administration will become more extreme on trying to cling to power, and the president will become more obsessed with the possibility of losing, and therefore will order people to do more and more illegal things. That's how I would expect the next 9 months or so before the election to go.
Well, Ari Berman, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Ari Berman, who's the National Voting Rights Correspondent for Mother Jones and a reporting fellow at Type Media Center. He's the author of Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America, and his latest book is Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It. And he has an article at Mother Jones, From Minnesota to Georgia, Trump's plans to interfere in the midterms are becoming more dangerous. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, already demonized by Vice President Vance, are about to lose their temporary protected status, having been targeted for what Trump calls a large deportation.
We'll make everything all right, so honey Jones, oh honey
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Robert Alexander, Professor of Political Science at Bowling Green State University and the former founding director of the Institute for Civics and Public Policy at Ohio Northern University. He's the author of 4 books, including Presidential Electors and the Electoral College, and most recently, Representation and the Electoral College. Welcome to Background Briefing, Robert Alexander.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Robert. And what's going on in your state? Because there's a hearing today in federal court whether or not the Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio, will lose their temporary protective status, which was granted to Haitians after the earthquake in Haiti killed 200,000 people, and it was extended after the Haitian president was assassinated, allowing another 10,000 or more Haitians to gather in Springfield. And as we know, J.D. Vance, in a speech in July of 2024, said that Springfield, Ohio, has been overwhelmed by Haitian refugees. And then later, he suggested that they were eating cats and dogs. And that was in September 2024. He said reports now show that people have had their pets abducted and eaten by people who should not be in the country. And then in the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, Trump repeated that bogus charge that the Haitians were eating dogs and cats. So they have been targeted for some time now. But where does that... Are there any results coming out of the court today on whether or not the Haitian community in Springfield is going to lose their temporary protected status?
Well, I will just kind of point back to that time period in that presidential campaign, and there were quite a few business owners and community leaders in Springfield standing up for the Haitians at that time, speaking out against those claims. And I think that took some, by surprise, including Trump and Vance. But because the Haitians are a pretty significant portion of that Springfield population, and they were pointed out to be good workers, folks that you could count on, and so the governor in our state, Mike DeWine, has been pretty sympathetic to the Haitians situation there in Springfield. You've got Bernie Moreno, who is a current senator, who has come out and said, look, temporary status is exactly that, temporary. And if you want to be in the United States, you need to be here through more traditional means. So there's been some reluctance to weigh in too much by some politicians, but certainly a lot of Republicans, save for Mike DeWine, have towed the line with Donald Trump and saying that their time is up. There's a lot of certainly Democrats that are kind of pushing back against that. Sherrod Brown, former senator in the state, who's running again for the Senate here in 2026, has said it's an abomination. So I think that there's certainly some pushback. The expectation appears to be that probably will be lifted, but it's in the court's hands.
Well, Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, is a very decent man, is he not? And he and his wife, Fran DeWine, have helped to fund a school in Haiti named in the honor of their deceased daughter, Becky. And, it's pretty clear that he has genuine understanding, knowledge, and history, not just with the Haitian community in Ohio, but with Haiti itself.
And he has ties to that region of the state. And he has certainly had a very delicate dance with Donald Trump over Trump's electoral career. I mean, there's been times where Trump visited the state and DeWine had other engagements. He found ways to not necessarily be seen with Trump. So he's certainly had a dance. He's kind of stood up to Trump in his way, in a more mild way. He has bucked even the GOP in the state. He's not super popular among Republicans in Ohio. A lot of Democrats and independents actually do like DeWine. He is a lame duck, and he has spoken up for the immigrants here in the state of Ohio.
So when back in September of 2024, when J.D. Vance said reports now show that people have had their pets abducted and eaten by people who should not be in the country. Apparently, that whole story was generated by a group of American Nazis called the Blood Tribe, which is a white supremacist, blood-obsessed Nazi group in Ohio. And they have the ones that first drew attention to this based upon pretty much nothing, except in September 2024, a Springfield woman posted on Facebook about the fact that she lost a cat. So it's pretty sad to think that the Vice President of the United States is getting his information from a bunch of American Nazis in Ohio.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of dark moments in our recent history, and where much of the kind of narratives are coming from, and the kind of fact checking that you find from that. I think Vance himself has even said, like, whether it's totally true or not is maybe not that relevant, but we certainly need to look into these things a little bit more. So he has not been afraid to kind of spread uncorroborated claims from time to time. And the question is whether or not those who spread, misinformation ultimately pay for that misinformation and spreading it. And in 2024, they did not.
So, Robert, you've done a poll, right, on the state of Ohio's attitudes to ICE, and I think that was back in October. And what did you find?
Yeah, well, yeah, we added some questions in our October poll of Ohio registered voters. And again, Donald Trump won our state 3 times. And this is Ohio's always been a kind of seen as that bellwether state. Barack Obama won it twice, and Trump flipped it and won it by a considerable margin in 2024, 11 points. And so many believe that Ohio is a pretty red state. So we did some polling in October, and we found that a majority of Ohioans, and I should preface this by saying that we weighted our poll to resemble a plus 10 Trump electorate. So this should look like the electorate that voted Donald Trump in. And even that electorate, a majority did not like the ICE raids that they had seen up to that point. And that was back in October. Even more did not like the idea of ICE walking around with masks, and even more did not like the idea that ICE was carrying out its activities in unmarked cars. So there was a pretty significant number of Ohioans that did not like what they were seeing of ICE at that time, and we really did not see much of an ICE presence in the state until December. And I'll further point out that if you dig a little bit more deeply into that data, you find that by wide margins, independents did not like what they were seeing with ICE by large margins. Non-whites did not like that. College educated voters. And so, young people, women, these are some of the areas that Donald Trump made some progress with in 2024. And that support is absolutely eroded on an issue like ICE. A lot of concern about civil liberties, government overreach, too much federal control. All of these things were borne out in the data in October, and I can only imagine that those numbers are going to be worse if we were to poll right now or next week as this presence begins to escalate in our state.
So let's talk about that, because President Trump has promised a large deportation, and apparently schools and churches in Springfield, Ohio, are making preparations to protect people and to feed people. And, we've already seen that in Minnesota, where volunteers have been bringing food to people who were shut in their own houses, afraid to open the door because of the possibility of being arrested by ICE. So you can see how citizens are mobilized, and a lot of it is done through churches. What are you hearing about preparations in Springfield since Trump has promised a large deportation? And the assumption is that the victims are going to be the Haitians, who the court case today will determine whether or not they lose their temporary protected status.
I think that, trying to look at Minnesota perhaps as somewhat of a template, that a lot of local officials are really urging the federal government to conduct their operations as above board as possible. So if there are deportations, if there are folks that are held in by ICE, that folks, ICE officers, do it in marked cars. They do it without masks on. That they are as transparent as possible, and that they really do go after those folks that. And I think this is something our governor has said: is go after lawbreakers, but not those that have jobs and are contributing to society. Whether that's something that this administration would do, um, doesn't appear to be in the offing, however.
Well, it seems to be sort of cruelty upon cruelty because you break up families, and we've seen some horror stories from Minnesota, along with the killing of two, American citizens who were monitoring what was happening. So that's bad enough. So presumably, if you break up these Haitian families and people with jobs, etc., and deport them, the second blow is if you deport them to Haiti. My God, that place is a complete catastrophe. The gangs have basically taken over the country, and the UN has sent in peacekeepers, and they're totally outgunned. So presumably, these people, if they were forced to return to Haiti, their lives would be in danger.
I think that and again, this is if you've got 15,000 Haitians in a community, people that live in Springfield know other Haitians, obviously. And when you start to personalize people, you make people human beings and not something that is a political pawn of, they're red or they're blue. It really does intensify feelings around that. And neighbor begins to tell neighbor. And so these kinds of stories that folks will be passing along, I have to imagine will have pretty significant consequence to those that are not tied into one political party or the other. There's a lot of Americans that, and a lot of Ohioans certainly, that don't buy everything that Republicans are selling, and certainly don't buy everything that Democrats are selling. And so those are the individuals that really will be, I think, affected, kind of, through the prism of seeing how these individuals are treated, particularly those that are showing up to work daily, where their neighbors are going to school with their kids, maybe tutoring their kids in English language. I mean, there's all kinds of relationships that are born of those types of cross-cultural situations.
So, just in the last few minutes, then, Robert, you did the earlier poll in October that found that Ohioans were turning against ICE. And now, of course, after what's happened in Minnesota, it seems the whole country is turning against ICE. And the figures are pretty alarming for Trump and for Kristi Noem and DHS in general. But what's your sense then of what's going to happen in November, assuming we have free and fair elections? What about, for example, you mentioned the former Senator Sherrod Brown, who was defeated last time around largely by enormous influx of money coming from Elon Musk. So what do you think is going to happen in November, particularly with Sherrod Brown? Because obviously the Democrats are hoping to take the Senate.
It's I think that the conditions in the state of Ohio will be about as strong as they possibly can for a Democrat to be successful. Sherrod Brown lost the state by a few points in 2024. I think it was 4 points, and he lost, by 4, but Donald Trump won by 11 points. And so there were a lot of folks that voted for Donald Trump turned around and voted for Sherrod Brown. We have seen throughout this period of Donald Trump's presence on the political scene that a lot of folks that are his supporters do not show up when he's not on the ballot. And so that's going to be a big question mark, I think, for John Husted, who was appointed to serve out the term of J.D. Vance's term. So Husted has not faced a Senate campaign before. He is, somewhat has some experience on the statewide scene. But Sherrod Brown is a very well-known commodity, has a lot of credibility when it comes to populism. And I think that that's something that you can really lean into kind of moving forward about, government overreach. And I think that that's kind of going to be one of the key features. And I'll also say, at our gubernatorial level, it's fascinating because we have Vivek Ramaswamy as the GOP likely nominee, and so some of that concern about race as an issue may rear its head in that campaign for governor. And at the same time, he's facing a female, Amy Acton, who was our governor our state health officer during COVID. And so there's so many odd things that are going on in this state that will come to a head in November. And I do believe the Springfield moment that we very well may see will have a lagging effect into that election cycle.
So just in closing, Amy Acton is running against, she's a Democrat, is she, running against
Yep.
Ramaswamy?
Yep, Amy Acton's running against Vivek Ramaswamy, and on our polling have essentially our polls as well as other that have polled Ohioans have found that that's essentially a dead heat, which is somewhat surprising given just how much Ohio appears to have tilted to the right. But there's also been some signs that there's still some purple in us. We voted to legalize cannabis. We voted to essentially enshrine Roe versus Wade. So, there's certain things in Ohio where there's still elements of that kind of strong populism that can go blue or red. And most Ohioans do not like too much government in their lives. And I think that while many may say, oh, we need some work on immigration reform and whatnot, the way that it's going about, I don't think most Ohioans would approve of.
Well, Robert Alexander, I thank you very much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Ian.
Well, thank you, Robert. And again, I've been speaking with Robert Alexander, who's a professor of political science at Bowling Green State University and the former founding director of the Institute for Civics and Public Policy at Ohio Northern University. He's the author of 4 books, including Presidential Electors and the Electoral College, and most recently, Representation and the Electoral College. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media. And our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.